Hey everybody. I have no clue what the heck happened there, but technical glitch. For some reason, I lost my internet connection, but hey, that's the way it rolls. So, when last we met 2 minutes ago, I was regaling you with the 5 reasons listed in the text as to the importance of a global perspective to sociology. And it was covering point number 2 about society, about immigration. And what happens is with immigration, it's really shaped the United States culture. I'll make this point several times in the course, is we are the only culture in the world that has representatives from every other culture as citizens living in it. So we are by far the most diverse culture in the world. Point number 3, what happens in the rest of the world affects life here in the US. Let me give you an example. Most new jobs in the United States, in fact, 80% of new jobs are based on international trade. Therefore, global understanding has never been more important. Yet, as we will see, many United States jobs have been outsourced, as they call it, moved the jobs overseas, causing unemployment in the United States to continue to be too high. And that was before the pandemic. 4, many social problems that we face in the United States are far more serious elsewhere. So for example, yes, we have poverty in the United States, but most of the poor here at worst are undernourished or malnourished. Few would be starving to death. But if you look at the poor in the rest of the world, most of them are starving to death. So the problems that we face here are far more severe in other countries. And finally, number 5, thinking globally helps us learn more about ourselves. I find this to be really interesting. Depression is far lower among the poor in other nations than it is among the poor in the United States. And this is true even in war-ravaged nations. So think about that. The poor in even war-ravaged nations are less depressed than the poor are here. I wonder if it has anything to do with our constant emphasis on material success. You also need to know for the exam, the hits keep coming, the 4 benefits of applying the sociological perspective for personal growth, which can be found on page 11. Could you go over those, Maynard? I'd be thrilled to do so. Number 1, the sociological perspective helps us assess the truth of common sense, or what's called common sense. On page 11 is a good example of something being called common sense. Common sense notions tell us that the jobs people have and the amount of money they make reflect their personal abilities as well as their willingness to work hard. That excerpt on page 11 is from a woman named Barbara Ehrenreich, who wrote Nickel and Dimed, and she actually posed as a waitress and did other minimum wage jobs just to see how people treated her. And what she found was she worked like a dog, got paid very little, and people treated her like crap. They judged her by her job. Okay, let's see the second point. The sociological perspective allows us to recognize and assess both the opportunities and the constraints that characterize our lives. Sociology assumes that people are primarily social beings by nature. Children enter the world dependent upon others for survival, and throughout history, individuals have found it advantageous to cooperate with other people. Well, why do we cooperate? For defense, for material comfort, to overcome the perils of nature, to improve technology, and so forth. In fact, the key to human evolution socially, socioculturally, I should say, is cooperation. It is cooperate. A Russian czar in 1909 wrote a book called Cooperation, the Factor in Evolution, Human Evolution. So it's our cooperation. Book after book has demonstrated this. It's cooperation that has moved us forward. Now, I'm making a point of highlighting this now because why becomes the big question. Why have we chosen the last few hundred years, instead of cooperating in securing necessary resources, we now compete? Why would we think competing for resources is a superior way to go? So step back objectively, and we'll be examining that as the course moves on. Therefore, sociologists would argue that individuals are, for the most part, socially determined. How? Well, parents profoundly influence their children together with other agents of socialization. Agents of socialization are like school, peers, the media, ways in which we learn the process of acculturation. So through being acculturated, learning the culture, it determines whether or not we're going to be a bigot. It determines whether or not we're going to be an athlete. Now you may say, no, that's all genetics. It's not. Don't forget that the old adage, 90% of sports is mental. When I used to teach the jock course, I used to tell the football players it's only 80% mental, to let those thick-headed guys off the hook a little bit, because some of them were just dumb. Anyway, they go, oh, thanks, Maynard. It's only 80% mental, huh? Yeah, right. Anyway, this level of social determination of our behavior also suggests that we are manipulated and are by social forces which are often unrecognized by us. Reese McGee has a nice quote to summarize that point. He said, freedom consists in knowing what these social forces are and how they work, so that we have the option of saying no to the impact of their operation on us. For example, if we grow up in a racist society, we may well be a racist unless we learn what racism is, how it works, and then choose to refuse its impact on us. In order to do so, we must first recognize that it is there in the first place. People are often puppets, blindly danced by strings of which they are unaware and over which they are not free to exercise control. A major function of sociology is that it permits us to recognize the forces operative upon us and to untie the puppet strings which bind us, thereby giving us the option to be free. And so that's a key point. You can't be free if your thinking is governed by the acculturation process. So going back to my first presentation, you got to examine, you got to peel away all the onion layers, of beliefs you've been holding all these years, which may or may not be true for you, and see whether or not it works for you. Analyze them, critique them, recognize that it's governing your thinking. And once you peel away all those onion layers, you'll get to who you are, free of the acculturation. As an example of applied sociology, Henry Ford, ever hear of him? Henry Ford. Didn't they name an automobile after him? Yes, because he founded the company. Anyway, back when he had the assembly line rolling and Ford Motor Company was the biggest motor company in the world, he set up what he called a sociology department. And its purpose was to monitor the behavior of his workers to discourage them from spending their wages on vices such as alcohol and tobacco. Yeah, so he was spying on them. See, today we don't have a sociology department. Nationally, we have what's called the Patriot Act, and the Patriot Act spies on us. Yeah. The curious thing about the Patriot Act is it was passed as an emergency measure because we were totally freaked out after 9/11 took place. And they purposely put in it a sunset provision. And a sunset provision means the law just expires, because it was only supposed to be short term because we were freaked out until we sort out terrorism and blah, blah, blah. But the interesting thing is every time it comes up for passage, we continue to renew it. And we're totally cool with it. We're totally cool with the government spying on us. So for example, if you go into the library and you take out a book on how to make a bomb, oh, you are so going to be on the list. Or even a book on terrorism, you may be on the list because they can monitor what books you're taking out of the library. 3, the sociological perspective, therefore, empowers us to be active participants in our society, to change society, hopefully for the better. So while there is social determination of our individual thoughts and actions, it's not total determination. Society does have nonconformists, deviants, and innovators, as well as robot-like people. So while humans are often puppets, they are also the puppeteers. If human behavior were chaotic, there would be no sociology, nor would the discipline exist if our behavior were perfectly programmed. The reality of human social life falls in a middle ground. We are thinking people creating changeable social patterns, making for an interesting and challenging sociology. By the way, I kind of forgot to mention there is absolutely no reason whatsoever that you need to take notes, because there is no question in the exam that's not out of the book. And I do that on purpose. There was a legendary professor here, Professor Emeritus, who twice won the Teacher of the Year award. And she was a biology professor and used to give the most amazing lectures. But her tests consisted of, you had to take notes so effectively and efficiently that you could recite verbatim everything she said. So she would ask you on a test question, what exactly did I say about this subject? If you got even one word wrong, you lose points. You had to know verbatim every word she said. So you got real good at taking notes in a course like that. And number 4, the fourth point, the sociological perspective helps us to recognize human variety and to confront the challenges living in our diverse world. There's many reasons why I use this particular text. One is this text was the first of the gazillion sociology texts out there to incorporate a global perspective, and that wasn't until 1990. So again, there are literally a gazillion intro to Soc books out there, but I use this one because a lot of what he does is he was the forerunner, he was the first. Okay, wouldn't it be fun right now to break the spell of these mesmerizing presentations and have a little in-class discussion? Yeah, Maynard, we'd love that. I can't hear you. Yeah, Maynard, we'd love that. You know, because if you don't want to do that, I'll just keep on lecturing. You don't want to go there. Okay, so my in-class question for you, class discussion question for you is, can you ask a little kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be president. Well, can anyone in the US really be president? Okay, so once again, I'm not going to pause, but you can pause while you think about that. Can anyone in the US really be president? Okay, so typically here's how students respond. They'll say, well, there are criteria that have to be met, legal criteria. Yes, that's true. For example, you have to be born in the United States. Now, you may recall that there was the birther movement that started when Obama was running for president. And guess who led the birther movement? Could it be our current president, Trump? Yes, who accused Obama of not being born in the United States. I believe he thought he was born in Kenya, whatever. Well, it turns out that he was born in Hawaii, and perhaps President Trump didn't realize at that time that that's one of our states. Anyway, I thought what was interesting is who he ran against was McLean. And Senator McLean was actually born in the territory of Panama. And nobody ever brought up that. Well, wait a minute, is he a U.S. citizen? It was the U.S. territory of Panama. So yes, he was a U.S. citizen. But that seemed a little bit more mysterious connection than somebody born in Hawaii, but nevertheless the birther movement. Now, unless you think, oh, well, what a fun thing that was with a bygone era. Do you remember as soon as Vice President nominee Kamala Harris was nominated? The birther movement began again, once again, inspired by President Trump, who began to question whether or not she was actually born in the United States. Good conspiracy theories die hard. Okay, then people say, well, you got to be 35 years of age. And interesting, some people say, well, you have to be rich, but that's not really true because only 17 presidents were clearly rich before they actually ran for president. So the whole idea is you run for president on other people's money. Anyway, so you don't necessarily have to be rich. Obama certainly wasn't rich. Carter wasn't rich. Clinton wasn't rich. Once they got out of office, oh yeah, then they were rich. I remember Clinton, when he got out of office, was charging for a 1-hour speaking engagement $1 million. So when people say, well, my time's worth money, how much is it worth? His was worth $1 million an hour. Okay, but here's the point I was really getting at. When's the last time we had a woman as president? Could it be never? But we say anyone can be president. We've had up until now one black president, and gosh, I lived to see the day. That was a very exciting moment to see a black president get elected in the United States. And prior to that, we used to discuss in class, what do you think will happen first? Will it be a black person or a woman? It turns out it was a black male. So 43 of the, all but one of the presidents has been white. How many Jews have been elected? None. One time a poll was conducted and it found that if a candidate indicates that he is Jewish, it immediately results in a 15% unfavorable rating. So no Jews ever been elected, certainly no Muslims ever been elected. Only one Catholic has been elected. Who could that be? Pause. Why, it was John F. Kennedy, also known as JFK. And I remember when he was running for president and people were aware of the fact that he was Catholic, some people who were troubled by that, there was like a whispering campaign. We can't elect a Catholic, he'll just end up being the Pope's dope. It's like, really? Like, why, if it's a religion other than Protestant Christianity, would you question whether or not the person's allegiance would lie to the country and not to the person's religion? It's just really interesting. And even Protestantism comes into question, because when Mitt Romney ran for president, he's a Mormon, also known as Church of the Latter-day Saints, and a lot of people weren't going to vote for him just in that reason, saying, well, he's going to have higher allegiance to the Church of the Latter-day Saints. What an interesting, preposterous, religious, intolerant argument that is. And so Kennedy finally had to address this because he realized that people were troubled by it. Some people were. And so I think it was a speech in Houston. He said, listen, he was a World War II hero. And he said, I'd like to point out that my Catholic blood is just as red as Protestant blood. People went, yeah, he's got a point there. Geez, that is kind of logical. And even at that, he won by only the slimmest of margins against that freaking crook, Richard Nixon. That's right, he was a crook. You can't say that, he's dead. Dead or alive, he was a crook, I tells you. And only two presidents have been divorced. Who could they be? Well, one was Ronald Reagan. Of course, the other was Donald Trump, who I guess has been divorced a couple of times. But anyway, so that was forbidden too. Oh my gosh, if you were divorced, no, you can't run for president. Like, okay. Ronald Reagan, he actually married Nancy, I think her maiden name was Davis, and word on the street was it was a shotgun wedding, if you know what I mean. She was already pregnant. Oh, the horror. Okay, moving on. Wasn't that discussion fun and educational? Okay, next topic, the origins of sociology. Auguste Comte, who was on the planet from 1798 to 1857 in France, is described in the text as the so-called father of sociology. Now, this is how it works in academia. He originally called his new discipline social physics, but he got word that the professor down the hall was going to steal that term and use it himself and quick publish a paper using it. So thinking that it was being stolen by someone else, Comte quickly changed it to sociology, which was coined in 1838. Right. Comte saw sociology as the product of a three-stage historical development, starting with the theological stage, which is the beginning of human history, to about 1350 in the Christian era. And it was also about the end of the Middle Ages, during which people took a religious view that society expressed God's will. Then we moved to the metaphysical stage with the Renaissance, on in through the Enlightenment in the 1400s, during which society was seen as a natural rather than a supernatural system, to what Comte called the scientific stage of human history, which began with the Enlightenment in the 1500s to the 1700s, when society is believed to be operated by its own laws, just as the physical world operates according to gravity and other laws of nature. So Comte's approach is what's philosophically called positivism, a scientific approach to knowledge based on positive facts as opposed to mere speculation. So science became a crucial part of sociology. Now, this is also because it's a product of the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment was science-based, and so sociology also became science-based. As is described in the text, the development of sociology as a discipline and of the sociological perspective was sparked by 4 basic societal changes which you need to know for the exam, and they're found on page 13. They're on your review sheet too. Number 1, the evolution of a new industrial economy. New energy sources emerge, so we go from moving water to later on creating steam, which allowed large factories to emerge under the control of strangers who were the owners, and the subsequent decline of the tradition of community life. Okay, so as we move into modern times, this is a constant observation. Community life seems to decline. And so in small villages where they're surrounded by farms, everybody knows each other, everybody works together, they're all in this together. But then all of a sudden comes the rise of factories, and people come from miles away and work there, and you don't even necessarily know the owners. And so it's strangers working for strangers, and it kind of erodes some of that social bond that existed prior to the rise of the Industrial Revolution. 2, the growth of cities. The European enclosure movement, which was fencing off farmland for sheep, for wool, for textile mills, drove tenant farmers to the cities to live. Now, this is nothing new. It's happening right now in Africa as we speak, where people have lived there for years and years and years, sometimes hundreds of years, are driven off the land and have to flee to the cities to live. With these burgeoning urban populations came all the social problems associated with cities, as what happens when you have too many people living too close together, as well as an impersonal social world crowded with strangers. A great example is walk down the streets in New York City, where the first rule is never make eye contact. 3, the development of new political ideas and consequent political change. As tradition came under attack in the 1600s to the 1700s, the focus changed from a moral obligation to God to a pursuit of self-interest, with an emphasis on personal liberty and individual rights, as was exemplified in our Declaration of Independence and in our Constitution. 4, a new awareness of society then took place, where the first 3 changes combined to make people more aware of their surroundings. While these changes were the greatest in France, Germany, and England, is because it's where the discipline of sociology was born. So the Industrial Revolution began in France, Germany, and England. Consequently, so did the discipline of sociology begin there. Okay, let's move on to the captivating topic, sociological theory. Now, something I've learned is whenever you have a new course, you got to market it. You know, you want to get students interested, you got to market it. And you certainly don't use theory in the title because it just puts people to sleep. And I never understood why. In fact, you'll notice you probably will never take a course with theory in the title unless you have to, if it's required for your major. So I wondered, why is that? Why as soon as you say theory do people start yawning? Well, it turns out theory is from the Greek theoria, which means the root word is, another offshoot of the Greek word theoria is theater, meaning a viewing. So sociological theory is from the word meaning a viewing. And when you listen to sociological theory, doesn't it feel like you just went to someone's viewing? I'll move on. Well, a theory is a statement of how and why specific facts are related. There are three general theories in sociology that are often referred to as sociological paradigms. Now, I'm going to pause for a moment so that you can flaunt your intelligence by telling me what is a paradigm. Quick, Google it so I look smart. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking a paradigm is a set of fundamental assumptions that provide basic images about society that guides thinking and research. No, 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 no. A paradigm, it's 2 10-cent pieces. Get it? A paradigm. You know, I'm just kind of curious. Show of hands, how many people thought that was one lame ass joke? You know, when I ask that in class, a lot of people don't raise their hand. I'm thinking, wow, you think that was funny? I am truly going over your head with this intellectual humor. I'll dumb it down. I'll start going with my Three Stooges material for you. Anyway, listen, I know it was a lame joke, but here's how it works. Everything in life is relative. That's why this is called the relative plane. Everything here is relative to something else. Up can't exist without down. Good can't exist without bad. It's all relative. That's what the symbols yin yang refer to, that this is the relative plane of existence. So comedy's no exception. Now, again, no extra charge. I'm also going to teach you about comedy and how to be funny, you know, and so I'll use my own jokes as classic examples of top-notch humor. Now, comedy is also relative. So I have to lay the comedy foundation, so to speak, with lame-ass jokes like the paradigm joke in order for the good jokes, the gold material that's going to come later, to be funnier. See, because it's funny by comparison to the lame-ass jokes. Get it? Wonder if anybody actually bought that. All right, well, moving on here, we're about to study each of the three paradigms. Now, pay careful attention to this. It's all described in your book, but it's critical to understand the three paradigms sooner than later. Why? Because you'll see that a lot of the questions on the exam are based on the three paradigms application to whatever subject matter the chapter is about. And you're going to see this throughout the text, that the three paradigms are applied to almost every topic in every main topic covered by each chapter. So the sooner you understand the paradigm, the sooner you'll be able to grasp how it's applied. And it's not rocket science, it's pretty simple. And once you get a handle on it, you're going to begin to see, it's the same old, just applied to a different subject. Okay, first is the structural functional paradigm. I'm going to give you the official definition and then explain it in my own words. Society can be understood as a framework for building theory that sees society as a complex system whose parts work together to promote solidarity and stability. So it's structural functional, so it has two components. Number one, society is composed of numerous kinds of social structure, which are relatively stable patterns of social behavior. So the emphasis here is on stability. How do we keep it going? Keep it going, keep it going, that we have a stable society, that's not chaos out there. The second part is these social structures are linked together in terms of the functions or the consequences they serve for society as a whole. Therefore, all elements of society have important functions that help perpetuate society, stabilize society, and keep it going in its present form. Got the picture? Okay, so for example, if you imagine that it's a structural functional, so structural is on one side, functional is the other. Remember, functional are the consequences. A woman named Charlotte Toll wrote a book called Common Human Needs, and she described that whenever groupings of people have gotten together throughout human history, they've all confronted the same basic needs. And so these would come under the consequences. So one of the consequences, the functions that society has to serve is, hey, we need food, clothing, shelter, fresh air, clean water. If we don't have it, we will die. So we need life-sustaining resources. Once we accomplish that, we also want life enhancing resources so that we can be all that we can be, self actualize, as Maslow put it. So we need life enhancing and life sustaining and life enhancing resources. Okay, so how do we go about that? Well, if you go through human history, you have different peoples living in different parts of the world, facing different climate, nature challenges. And how do they figure out how to get food, clothing, and shelter? It's just trial and error. And so they'll try certain things and woo, that didn't work. Let's try something else. Why didn't it work? Well, half the people died. Or, hey, we all died. It's time to start over. So through trial and error, they begin to figure out what works. Now, these original peoples are categorized in sociocultural evolution as hunters and gatherers. So they hunted animals and they foraged for plants and so forth to supplement their diet. So anyway, they had to figure out what worked. Once they figured out what worked, as in, hey, we can sustain ourselves, or we can actually have kids and they can be sustained, we're going to keep it going. Okay, so they begin to develop a system, and they're going to systematically acquire food, clothing, and shelter by always following these processes that they've proved through trial and error, in fact, work. And so over time, this system develops and develops and develops, and we call a system like this economics. That's all economics is. Economics at its most fundamental level is the acquisition of needed resources. Okay, now it's a little bit more complicated than that. We'll talk about that more when we get to economics, because it's not only the acquisition, it's also the consumption and distribution of needed resources. So that's what an economic system is. And economic systems have changed over the years, and they're even relevant to specific parts of specific cultures. So you have in the Amazon, you still have hunting and gathering tribes, or at least pastoral and horticultural tribes, in the midst of a modern civilization in Rio and Brasilia and other major cities of Brazil. So you have competing economic systems even within the country. Okay, so economics becomes the structure. So it becomes a social institution, as they call it. We do it so often, so repetitively, it becomes institutionalized way of an institutionalized practice, an institutionalized way of meeting our common human need for resources. Okay, what other needs we must meet rather? Well, we have to figure out a way to make decisions. Who gets power? Is the person who's the biggest one get all the power because he can kick everybody else's ass? Or should it be the wisest one? Should he have all the power? Or should we all share the power, decentralized power? And how are we going to make decisions? Well, over time, they figure out what works for that particular group, and then that's called politics. Not politics in the more narrow way we understand it, but it's the distribution and allocation of power within a group. Who makes the decisions, and how do we make decisions? Okay, and so that becomes the structure. The consequences, the function are how do we make decisions? How do we allocate power in society? What else do we got to figure out? We got to figure out how we're going to raise the kiddies, how we got to teach them the way it is, because we got to teach them these rules we've learned, these processes we've learned, because it's keeping it going, it's keeping it going, it's keeping it going, it's keeping society stable, it's perpetuating society. So we're going to have to teach them, we're going to have to acculturate them, socialize them, and raise them. So who's going to be responsible for that? Well, throughout human history, the family has always had the central responsibility for socializing and raising children. And so the family becomes the social institution under the structures, and the function, the consequences, is raising and acculturating the kids. And finally, the fourth classic function and institution is, how do we get everybody to stay on board with this? You know, how do we make sure that there isn't these people who aren't going to go by the rules? Because if people start not going by the rules and doing their own thing, all of a sudden society loses its stability. All of a sudden we're not on the same page anymore. So how do we get everybody to integrate this, to so internalize these rules that they don't even think twice about not following them? And that's the function of religion. Religion's function is to integrate into us the rules and regulations of life so that we follow them dare I say, religiously. Okay, so the main function of religion is integration. Okay, we can also look at it in a more finite way. We can look at consequences. Robert Merton, sociologist in 1968, demonstrated that social patterns can have many functions, and that these functions will actually have a different impact on different people in society, perhaps in different classes or whatever, so they don't always impact people in the same way. So he listed three different types of functions. He said there are manifest functions, latent functions, and social dysfunctions. So when we're in class, and you can do this at home, it'll be fun. We analyze the automobile. We apply these three different types of functions to the automobile, also known as the car. Okay, so first of all, what would be the manifest functions of the automobile? These are recognized, desired, and intended. Pause. Pause is over. Okay, so again, hit the pause if you want to think about this, which I encourage you to do. See, then you're mentally applying these concepts. Okay, what would be the function of an automobile? Well, when we have this class discussion, students will typically say, well, it's transportation. Well, that's true, but that's true of a bicycle, a jet plane, a helicopter, a wagon, and on and on. So no, we got to narrow it down more. What gets you from point A to point B? Well, once again, most forms of transportation in some way, shape, or form do. So the question becomes, what's unique about the automobile? Okay, because unlike Europe, they went the train route, we went the automobile route. Okay, so what's so special about the automobile? Well, the automobile is ridiculously convenient. It gets you to where you want to go, exactly when you want to go. So in Europe, where they rely more on trains and other forms of public transportation, the train can get you to every remote village in the country. However, you got to follow the timetable of the train, and the train doesn't, run all day long, route after route to that particular tiny community, and maybe only one a day. And it drops you off the train station. You still have to get to where you want to go once you're at the train station. Not with the automobile. You can leave whenever you want. You can stop along the way, and it takes you wherever you want to go. So why do we go the route of the automobile? Well, I'm going to make the case that as we move through this course, that we in the United States are the most individualistic society in the world, bar none. And so individualism is really sacred to the United States. In fact, you're seeing individualism play out now by many people who choose not to wear a face mask, feeling that that impinges on their individual freedom. So individualism has been a hallmark of the United States. Anyway, so think about how cars are now. Cars are, you pick out the car that reflects you as a person, and you don't want anybody even else in the cars, because otherwise you may have to listen to music they want to listen to. I don't want to listen to that shit kicking music, or I don't want to listen to that hip hop or whatever. I just want to listen to my music. I mean, it's really interesting because even though high occupancy vehicle lanes, you can only be in them unless you have more than one person. Sometimes you have to have more than two people in them, and there's hardly anybody in them. Even at that, we don't want to carpool. Although there are some unfortunate examples of people who have been caught by the police that instead of having another person in the car, because God, who wants to go there? They actually had a blow up doll in the passenger seat. At least that's what they told the officer was the reason why the blow up doll was on the passenger seat. Okay, well, moving on, what are the social dysfunctions? Social dysfunctions are undesirable effects of a social pattern that may disrupt the operation of society. Okay, so pause. Think about what are some of the social dysfunctions of the automobile. Okay, pause is over. Well, things students come up with is one, pollution. Yeah, I mean, who thought of it when they produced the car? They didn't think about pollution. Were they even aware of the concept of pollution at that time? And so people did estimate, oh my gosh, particularly truck traffic, how much it creates pollution. So that's one of the social dysfunctions. What's another social dysfunction? Um, Cars are expensive to maintain. I saw a study recently that it's still cheaper to own a car than to rely on public transportation. But yet, when you live in a major city, why would you want a car when public transportation is so readily available? Um, and so instead, we chose the automobile despite the fact that they can be expensive to maintain. What else is a social dysfunction? How about gridlock? Anybody who lives here in the Lehigh Valley knows that around 2:30 to 5 o'clock, Route 22 is just at a basic standstill, even though there's no accident. Another great example is in Philadelphia, the Schuylkill Expressway. It moves at a crawl even at the best of times, and there's no accident. So there's just too many cars on the road at that particular time. And you think, and there are estimates, and I think Los Angeles has the greatest example of gridlock in the United States, because they estimate how many hours of a day do you, if you're in the metropolitan area commuting, do you just sit in traffic, and they got the highest number of hours. And it's really interesting too, looking at Los Angeles, because Los Angeles, if you're out in the burbs, I mean, it's spread out, Los Angeles. They weren't confined by territory like New York City was, where they had to kind of build straight up. Los Angeles just spread out. All the Western cities are more spread out because they had all kinds of land available to them. Anyway, when you're in the burbs of Los Angeles, I'm not kidding you, people drive like death. It's awesome. People are driving 100 miles an hour, merging onto 8-lane highways. It is a thrill ride, to be sure. White knuckle all the way. It's like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. They drive so fast in Los Angeles that when they change a tire, they're changing the tire at 60 miles an hour. Maynard pauses for the laughter that never comes. Well, anyway, despite that, despite the speed you can drive in the suburbs, the average speed in the Los Angeles area is 11 miles an hour because of all the gridlock. When you're on Route 5 driving down to San Diego, it is just a constant line of traffic. I-95 going down to Florida at holidays, constant line of traffic. You're not blowing down the highway at 80. You're just in this huge line of traffic heading to the promised land, Florida. And you think our situation is bad. In China, gridlock's even worse. They've had gridlock at times that were backed up 20, 30 miles, and these are like 16-lane highways, and it took days for the gridlock to break up. So it's even worse in some other countries. Okay, so that's another social dysfunction. And obviously, auto accidents are another social dysfunction of the automobile. And last, let's go to latent functions, largely unrecognized and unintended. So latent functions could be dysfunctions, but they can't be manifest functions. So it could be a social dysfunction we didn't think of. Like, again, I don't think anybody thought about the fact that there'd eventually be pollution, or another latent function would be auto racing. Auto racing is a huge industry. I don't think anybody thought it would ever get to that when they started mass producing the Model T automobile at the Henry Ford manufacturing plant. So let's see, what could be some other latent functions that you can think of? I'm trying to think of things other students have noted over the years. Well, let me toss one in I thought about. I thought that, it's entirely possible that one latent function of the automobile might be that maybe as many as 5% of the students in this class owe their very existence to the backseat of an automobile. Now, think about how that works. You know how it is when you're young. Do you want to go to your parents' house? No, my parents are home. You want to go to no, my parents are home too. Well, why don't we just drive around the floating living room, get something to drink perhaps, or smoke or whatever, and just partay, you see where I'm going? Okay, you got that. You know, when I said that one time in class, 3 students in the front of the class, as soon as I said that, you might owe your existence in the back seat of an automobile, just went, ew, together. And I said, what do you find disturbing? The fact that you may have been conceived in the back seat of an automobile, or that your parents are doing it? And they go, oh, our parents doing it. And I said, listen, let me wise you up. You didn't come from the stork. Like, wow, you're in college, you didn't realize that? Whew. Okay, each of these 3 paradigms has a critique, and the critique is the same critique throughout the course, simply applied to a different subject. And the critique is the emphasis on how society seems naturally arranged in its operation makes a lot of sense. However, this paradigm tends to underemphasize how varied social patterns are from place to place and how changeable they are over time. It also tends to overlook the social divisiveness and conflict created by these social patterns. So we have differences in class, race, power, prestige, all as a result of the very systems and the very systems and functions that we set up. I will point this out to you too, because this is important to understand that these all have a perspective politically too. The structural functional paradigm has a politically conservative perspective. But think about it. Think about what the word conserve means. Conservative means, it means conserve, keep things the way they are. So if you're an environmental conservationist, you're trying to preserve the environment. So people who are conservatives are trying to preserve the values that go back to our founding fathers, and to preserve the essence of this nation. So it makes sense, because what's the emphasis of this paradigm? Stability. Keep things going as they are. It works. Why change things? You know, stability, stability, stability. Okay, next paradigm is the social conflict paradigm. Again, read the official definition in your text. Society is a complex system characterized by inequality and conflict that generate social change. So while the structural functional emphasis is on social integration, how harmoniously everything works together in our system, the social conflict emphasis is on social division, how divided we are. The focus is on the unequal distribution of needed resources, rights, and privileges in society. The argument is that virtually all social patterns are useful to some people, who are referred to as the haves, while simultaneously being harmful to other people in society, the have-nots. So society then is seen as an arena in which the interests of some categories of people, the owners, the rich, and the powerful, are opposed to the interests of other categories of people, the workers, the poor, and the powerless. Within the social conflict approach, there are 2 other important types of conflict analysis, which we will return to throughout the text. One is gender conflict approach, which focuses on inequality and conflict between women and men. It's closely related to feminism, and feminism is the support for equality for women and men. The second aspect of the social conflict approach is the race conflict approach, which focuses on inequality and conflict between people of different racial and ethnic categories. Malcolm X. Ever hear Malcolm X, 1960s icon? It's not Malcolm the 10th, even though it's Roman numeral X, it's Malcolm X. He said, "It has historically been the case with white people in the regard for Black people that even though we might be with them, we weren't considered of them." You know, the Reverend Al Sharpton is, I hope. Reverend Al has nationally known political figure out of New York City, and he has often jumped on problems, racial problems appearing around the United States, down a little bit more weight, a little bit more national prominence to a local problem. The Reverend Al said, quote, I never knew I was underprivileged until I took a sociology class at Brooklyn College. Hey, that's what we're here for. You don't know how bad off you are until I pointed out to you in sociology. No extra charge. Well, you know, it reminds me of the time when Reverend Al jumped on, again, an individual case to try to, provide some national interest and engage more processes for social change by doing so. But Chris Rock, you may know Chris Rock, African-American comedian, at one time his mother went to the Cracker Barrel restaurant, sat there for an hour and a half, and nobody even waited on her. And she thought it was a clear example of racism. And the Reverend Al jumped on it too and said, hey, this is racism. This is unconscionable. Yeah, I was thinking about it later. Like, that's interesting. Here, a Black woman goes, and later on, by the way, Cracker Barrel said, oh, it was just a shift change and we didn't know she was there and on. But I was thinking about it, I think, here's a Black woman going into a restaurant called the Cracker Barrel. It don't get more obvious unless they called the place the Honky House. No wonder a Black woman didn't get served in the Cracker Barrel. I'm sure I'll get a few emails on that. When I tell that joke in class, a lot of the white students don't know how to react. And then I point out, hey, the Black students are giggling away. You can laugh too. Well, the critique of this approach is, by emphasizing power struggles as the dominant trait of societies, this approach tends to underemphasize the level of social unity and cohesion that does exist based on interdependence and shared values. Okay, so what happens is the structural functional approach overemphasizes stability and harmony in society. You could also make the case that the social conflict approach overemphasizes how divided we are in society. Now, I would say that kind of depends on your status in society, that you may see it as far more divided and influencing your personal life, as do people of color or people of low income than do people who are white, and people who have lots of money don't feel the effects so much of social division. Also, because the social conflict point of view is so change-oriented, it's accused of lacking scientific objectivity. Well, Karl Marx developed the social conflict point of view, and he had his famous statement, the point isn't to understand society, the point is to change it. Okay, so social conflict theorists are always accused of trying to change things, whether it needs change or not. Change for the sake of change. So therefore, it lacks scientific objectivity. And also, it has because it lacks scientific objectivity, it also has a radical liberal approach. So its political approach is liberal/radical. But that's kind of a joke too, because the people who accuse them of having a political approach and lacking objectivity are the structural functionalists, who clearly are arguing from a conservative political perspective. And the third and last social paradigm is the symbolic interaction paradigm. Both the structural, functional, and social conflict paradigm present a macro level orientation, meaning a focus on broad social structures that characterize society as a system. So think how I describe both of them. We're looking at the big picture here. And then you got to kind of whittle down from all that. Well, where does this leave me in the system under structural functionalism or under social conflict point of view? So these paradigms are consequently criticized as being too abstract, too generalized to realistically account for everyday personal interactions that we experience. So the symbolic interaction paradigm is instead a micro level orientation, in that it's a framework for building theory that focuses on our situational patterns of human interaction. So here, society is viewed as being continuously recreated as the product of human beings, literally constructing reality through the everyday interactions of individuals. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, this means that reality, okay, let's suppose we're all meeting in a classroom. The reality of the classroom that day doesn't exist until we all engage in that class and create that reality. And that reality will be different for every class. And so as we go about our day-to-day lives, reality doesn't exist until we construct it based on our interactions with other people. So humans interact based on the meanings we attach to the surrounding world. Through this process of subjective, not objective, subjective perceptions and responses, we define our identities, our rights, our duties, and our responsibilities to one another, which may vary from situation to situation and from setting to setting. Thus, this process of reality construction is highly variable. Okay, so what does that mean? If we engage each other in class, then we are engaging each other based on the understanding of I'm playing the role of professor, you're playing the role of student. And so our interchange, our subjective interchange, and how we construct reality is based on what meanings we attach to what role I'm supposed to be playing as professor, and what role you're supposed to be playing as a student. Now, let's suppose I one day again can go to a restaurant, and I go to a restaurant and there are you, the same student I interacted with in class, and you're a waitstaff person. Okay, so our interaction is going to be a little different. For example, I will point out to you, hey, you know, one good way to suck up to me is to comp me a couple of drinks. Hey, just kidding, folks. Just a little joke, not true, not true. Would never expect that for. But anyway, our exchange will be a little bit different. You know, we're not in the student professor role. Now we're in the I'm the client and you're the server role. So how we engage each other and how we construct reality is all based on the roles we're playing and the meaning we attach to those roles and to the situation in which we're engaging. So it's highly variable. Okay, but once we shape the world in turn shapes us. So we have shaped a world in which a woman has not yet been present in the United States. We've created that reality, and now that reality comes back in a way and created social forces that make it very difficult for a woman to become president up until hopefully in a few more years. Within this paradigm is Goffman's dramaturgical analysis. Think of the word drama, dramaturgical analysis. He said human beings, like actors and actresses on a stage, deliberately act to foster certain impressions in the minds of others. We play roles. Okay, and that's why Shakespeare, by the way, these famous sages and gurus and saints and people I talk about weren't necessarily only in religion. I already mentioned Ralph Waldo Emerson in his book, The Soul. Shakespeare also had some very mystical things to say, which most people didn't quite grasp what he was referring to, but he did. And so that's what he was saying when he was referring to, and I know I'm just paraphrasing and probably bastardizing in the process, where he said the whole world is merely a stage, and we are merely the players upon it, each with their own exits and entrances. And so he saw the whole world as that. It's just a stage where we play, you know, and we construct reality. And so people say, I can never get up in a stage. I just couldn't do that. I get stage fright. Let me point something out to you. Your whole life is a stage, and you are playing a role, and it's improv theater, right? Now, here's the problem I've noticed. We keep using the term play the role, but most of us don't play the role. We serious the role. Oh my God, my life is so serious. Yeah. You know, more on that later. Things don't happen accidentally to you. They happen purposefully. And so those things that vex you are happening on purpose because you chose them to happen. So you got to learn something from what's vexing you. But more on that later. That's just a quick overview. But here's the important thing is life is to be enjoyed. This is Disney World. The whole idea is to have a great time here, you know? And so you got to learn to play the role and not take it so seriously. And especially don't take yourself so seriously. Okay, the critique of this approach. This paradigm's emphasis on how people spontaneously interact with one another provides needed focus in how we as individuals actually experience society. But This emphasis tends to downplay the influence of larger social structures and forces, such as class, sex, and race, which also influence how we experience reality. Let me just pause for one moment and point something else out about the social construction of reality. Sometimes people say, well, you know what, you can't change things. Or the old expression, you can't change City Hall. See, that misses the whole point. We create City Hall. Not only did we create it in the past, the way the system works today is being created every day. It's recreated. Why? Because we continue to choose to participate in it. And so Gandhi pointed this out. Martin Luther King Jr. pointed this out and showed that it works is when you stop participating in it, the system no longer continues. So let's just say that all, 330 million people in the United States tomorrow just decided, whoa, this whole thing sucks. I'm just going to stay home. Not because of the pandemic, but I choose to stay home. That ends the system. The system isn't buildings. It isn't Washington, D.C. It's not the governmental structure. It's none of those things as such. It's us. It's we, the people, continuing to participate in it that creates the system every day. When you stop going along with it, it no longer can continue. Just saying. The power has always lied with the people, not the people in charge. The people in charge are merely in charge because the people allow them to be in charge and tell them what the hell to do. And we forget all that. We forget that we, the 330 million, not the 500 and some legislators and the president, they're not in charge. We are. We forget that we have the power and that we've abdicated our responsibility to exercise it effectively. Okay, well, which is the best of the three approaches to use? All three. And that's yet another reason why I use this particular book, because it gives equal weight to all three paradigms. Now, depending on the subject matter, you'll see as we get into the different chapters of the book that at some times the social conflict point of view may have more to say about this subject matter than the social conflict, or certainly when we get to the chapter on the social construction of reality, the symbolic interaction paradigm is going to play a larger role in help in facilitating our understanding, but he gives equal weight to all three. And so I think that is the most realistic way to approach sociology. Now, it is totally fair game that I could offer this course and just pick out a book that, for example, has the social conflict point of view, and there's plenty of them out there. Sociology 100, strictly the social conflict point of view. But see, I think that only gives you partial truths. And the idea here is, again, going back to my first presentation, to try to get as much as we can of the whole truth, all the perspectives on the truth, which this particular book, Sociology by Machionis, in fact, does. Here's another one of the world according to Maynard thoughts is no one has the whole truth. Everyone just has a partial truth. Their error is in thinking they have the whole truth. So conservatives and liberals each think they got the whole truth. Their error is in thinking that. They do not each have the whole truth. Each side has important truths, but not the whole truth. And so when we get further along in the course, you will see that conservative values and liberal values are slightly different, but they're all American values. All of them are, right? They're all key American values. It's just liberals emphasize some and conservatives emphasize others. Well, how do you embrace the whole thing? You have to understand how it's just a perspective from the liberals. It's just a perspective from conservatives. We embrace all the American values, and we forget that sometimes. We forget that when these people we so bitterly disagree with, they're espousing American values just as much as we are. And so therein lies what I said before is we need to find common ground between us. Hey, we all want to see a better America. We just have different paths in which we think we have to go and emphasize different values that will get us there. So it's also true, psychology is a great example. it's my understanding of psychology, there is still no one theoretical paradigm that everybody agrees on. So you got Rogerian theory, you've got um, you got Rogers, you got Jung, you got all the theorists in psychology, Freud, all of which have a different perspective. And psychology hasn't yet found one where we all say, well, this is the correct one. Is it a blend of all of them? So here's the point. No one has the whole truth. And in order to get the whole truth, you need all the theoretical paradigms. So each of the theory in psychology has a contribution to the whole truth. But the error is in thinking that any one of those theories is the whole truth. Got the picture? If you understand that principle, you can apply it to all kinds of thinking in all of life where people just don't want to get the whole truth and err in thinking they already got it. Okay, you will notice at the end of this chapter on page 20 is a table that summarizes the paradigms. Now, throughout the book, whenever we cut, you'll always see a table for each chapter that summarizes, the paradigms. These tables are really helpful because they give you a snapshot glance at, aha, here are the critical differences between the paradigms. Sometimes that can get lost when you're reading the text. So look at the tables, understand the fundamental differences, and then go back and read more thoroughly in the text and go, oh, okay, now it makes sense. Again, repetition, cross-referencing will help you. So always look at the tables. There's always a table summary of the three paradigms applied to the subject matter. You will also see at the end of this chapter, they're then applied to sports in the United States, each of the three values to show you the value of each perspective, each paradigm in understanding, in facilitating our understanding of sports. So I would encourage you to look at that too as an applied example so that you begin to just get it down like, yep, I got the paradigm. So look at how it's applied to sports as well. Well, I could go on, and I will, but that'll end it for chapter 2 today. So study on. I will soon be letting you know where to find these. Of course, by the time you're watching this, you already know of how to find it, so never mind on that one. But hey, that's it for chapter 2. It was great talking to you all, and I'll see you with chapter 3. Ciao.